All right, I think let's get started. We're 5 minutes in, so got a few slides to go through before we get started with the session. So I'll just jump right in. Welcome to the webinar. This is Value of Data Democracy Throughout Property's Lifecycle, hosted by CIBSE Queensland. CIBSE would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land where we work and live, the Turrbal and Jagera people. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to life of this city and this region. CIBSE is the home of building services engineers, and now you can obtain RPEQ through CIBSE as well. So there's no need to be an Engineers Australia member at all. As of January, CIBSE is an approved assessment entity to carry out assessments on behalf of BPEQ to determine eligibility for registration as either an electrical or mechanical engineer. So do get in touch with us if you want more info. Oh, there we go. The video's on now. You would be required to hold an accredited degree with the Washington Accord or equivalent qualification. For more information, visit cibse.org/RPEQ. Okay, so next on the agenda, we just have a couple of plugs for a couple of other webinars that are coming up. On Thursday this week, CIBSE New Zealand are hosting a session on Legionella mitigation. This will be presented by Chris Lundberg, a public health engineer at Becker. This session is appropriate for those based in Australia and New Zealand and will provide an overview of the risks of Legionella and the associated design mitigations, primarily from the perspective of domestic water systems. We'll put the links in the chat for registration for these events as well. And the other one we have here next week, CIBSE New South Wales is running a webinar to launch the latest CIBSE ANZ guide, TM65 ANZ. The session addressing embodied carbon in building services will provide a methodology for calculating embodied carbon in building services for buildings in Australia and New Zealand, developed by a working group led by CIBSE ANZ, GBCA and Integral. This methodology that was launched last month on CIBSE's knowledge portal, adopting TM65 in Australia is the first step towards understanding the carbon impacts of the supply chain for MEP products. So next week, the panel will talk about TM65 ANZ and how consultants and manufacturers can get involved to increase the transparency of the materials in MEP products and build a product database. Taryn Cornell from the GBCA will also discuss how this methodology has been integrated into the Green Star rating tool. The panel will also explore the issues from the quantity surveyor side, looking at one of the most exciting projects in Sydney. This event will be live streamed and in person. We will put the link in the chat for registration. Okay, I have a bit of a plug here for CIBSE Queensland. CIBSE is looking for new individuals to join the committees. The Queensland committee is in need of some fresh new blood. We're keen to organise more events and give more to our members. So we'd love to get more people involved. So if you email secretary@cibse.org.au, that will come through to me. And anything you can do to help work with CIBSE would be much appreciated. It's a great opportunity to build your networks and give back to the industry. Some of our members suggest seminars and webinars, or just helping to organise them and pull them together. Events for young engineers would also be great if we could have some more of those. So yeah, if you're interested in getting involved, get in touch. Just like to acknowledge Connexus Recruitment for their support of CIBSE ANZ's annual programme of technical events. ConnexUS is a boutique recruitment consultancy dedicated to ANZ's design and construction sector. With over a decade of combined experience recruiting exclusively within this space, their consultants are amongst some of the best in the industry and are proud to have connected talented individuals from across the globe with some of Australia's most recognised consultancies. They are advocates for people and businesses in their journey to professional success, striving to bring back a consultative approach to the recruitment market. The key disciplines that they recruit for include building services, digital engineering, and project management. So thank you, ConnexUS. Okay, on to the show. We've got some great speakers today to talk about data democracy. If you have no idea what that means, you will soon be educated, hopefully. So on our panel today, we've got Alex Leese, founder of Forge Architecture, which has been built on the back of 20 years in the architectural and construction industry. Alex has contributed to a number of high-profile architectural projects, with leading architectural firms in Brisbane, and also worked in design management, including BIM management for a number of construction firms. Through Forge Architecture, Alex offers services and experience in a range of areas, including architectural design, BIM management, computational design development. In all areas of consultancy, he aims to have a strong emphasis on efficiency using technology and building systems that leverage available data or deliver this information to the greater design construction team. We also have Parag Shind. He's an ESG manager at Australian Unity Wealth. Parag has over 18 years experience in built environment sustainability and data-driven business insights and outcomes. He is National Manager ESG Property for Australian Unity, and he and his team are currently focused on data and ESG strategic planning, development, leasing, acquisition frameworks, and are progressing on a 2030 net zero pathway, enabled by technology applications like Internet of Things, smart building systems, metering, strategic contracts, sustainability, OPEX, CAPEX program planning, and renewable energy strategy, alongside a social impact and governance framework to accelerate Australian Unity's net zero and ESG trajectory. And last but not least, Liam Murray. Liam is the founder of Build Apps. Having spent 15 years working with the world's leading real estate investment trusts as a consultant, Liam realized large property owners were becoming increasingly reliant on third parties for access to their own data, and that data obtained remained in silos. This led him to create a platform that links property data sets and then builds apps on top of that data to empower building owners and operators. And we are going to jump from here straight into Liam's presentation. Liam, are you ready?
Can you see my screen?
I can still see my screen. So if I stop share, that might help, mightn't it?
You got me?
Yes, got you now.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. So a little bit about myself. So my journey to data democracy. So I started life as a mechanical engineer, and then started doing energy modeling long before BIM was even around, and the really early days of IES. Then moved into an ESD consultant. I had a little time as a BIM advisor, independent commission agent, portfolio advisor, and somehow ended up in a software engineering role. But the common thread through it all was that data was being exchanged in different ways. I worked for in the UK on some of the biggest hospitals, and did the first ever BREEAM Outstanding in the UK. Did Global Change Institute, and the timber building with Lend-Lease, not too did the first 6-star Green Star primary school, and then been working with a lot of the big REITs that you can kind of see there, looking at their whole portfolio. So not just one single building, but what information they had on every single building across the portfolio, as they start to set targets for 2025 or 2030 for net zero strategies. What I wanted you to do was kind of, start thinking about who's the end user, and by that I mean, the client who has to operate this building for 50 years. And if you take the different scenarios of, your roles to hand over all the buildings and integrate them into a huge portfolio, like Parag talks later on. Quite often you'll have existing asset management systems or computerized maintenance management systems with 50 buildings in, and it's a 10-year-old system, but you've got a brand new BIM building or digital twin on your brand new building. How do you integrate that, the same system? Other roles, so the meter energy manager within the team, looking at all the different metering data. When the data goes missing or you get locked out, how do you survive? Roles, and this is a real world scenario where a colleague of mine was responsible for the performance, and overnight the CEO completely changed the ESG target, and he had to get together all the performance data to prove how they weren't going to be carbon neutral by 2030. It was going to be net zero by 2030. They're going to be by 2025, and he needed basically 3 days to do it. And then again, a similar, if you're in charge of procurement, and and we're seeing it more and more that companies going into liquidation, what impact that's going to have on your whole portfolio from an operational sense. So thinking about, there's not just one client, there's lots of people who have to fulfill different roles with this building for the next 50, 60 years of its life cycle. The status quo at the minute is, typically there's a lack of security and ownership and integrity. Lots of spreadsheets, or there's a big increase in the number of SaaS that's going on, so software as a service, where here's your platform for doing your metering, here's your platform for doing your asset management, here's your platform, and it creates bigger and bigger silos of the data. The investors who put billions of dollars, and they're the people who actually create these projects for Alex and Jen heavily involved in. They're expecting more and more complex reporting metrics, so the data sets need to get better and better. Lots of businesses lack the ability to cross-pollinate the data sets. So the new, like I said, the new buildings mixed with the old data sets, or the cross-department stuff can't be done. And then lots of people searching for the next prop tech silver bullet. So it wouldn't be a day where I don't receive something where, you do this and it will say the ultimate ESG, the ultimate this, and there is no magic silver bullet. All the different departments that typically operate in a big REIT who's looking after a building. So the maintenance and facilities teams, the approvals and investments teams, the risk and compliance, sustainability, the ESG, project asset management, and the tenants and marketing. Those in the middle are just some of the tables, and for each one of those tables, there's probably 50 data points that are critical to each of those tables. So when you extrapolate it out, there's thousands and thousands of data points that are moving all the time, and trying to get a relationship between all of those is the bit that's is difficult, but if you set out from the start, it can be achieved. Lots of people, so from an engineering point of view, and I strip it back to just making a decision on swapping a chiller out in an existing building, it's very easy to just go away and get the decking or the carrier brochures and make a decision just on one simple factor. As things have got more complex and the expectations have got more, as you go off to the right in this slide, these are all the things you need to think about along the way. And once you start going to the far right, you're thinking about, the portfolio reputation, you're thinking about, the access to debt, your net zero pathway. Are you stopping that by just that one piece of plant equipment that you're making? So getting engineers to think about, there's far more impact than just, what's the most age or efficiency. The impacts go way beyond that. Data democracy. So the idea of everybody having access to the same data sets in a relevant, timely and equitable way. What that means is is that it's not you just throw all the data in one big place and you have data anarchy. So yeah, it's not just endless spreadsheets and we email them back and forth and it goes all over the place. And similar, it's not all tied and locked down into a data dictatorship, so we can't see everything. We want good level of control, so the IT team are very comfortable with the security and yeah, the right people accessing the right thing. The leases, the P&Ls for buildings, the various different bits and pieces do need to be controlled. So getting that sweet spot where everybody can do it and making sure that it's equitable. So not everybody can code software. So being able to make it so that those who can't can still use the data and good visualizations from their point. Benefits of data democracy. So being able to see that macro holistic picture is really important. But then also being able to scrutinize down into the micro level and strengthen your performance and not just focus on one building, but see that everything else on top of it. Also improving your building performance, particularly with some of the stuff that, yeah, we've been exploring with artificial intelligence and machine learning, by seeing trends that happen. So yeah, it could be every time you change the tenancy mix, you see a decrease in asset lifecycle, or every time you do a project which brings in a not-for-profit to a shopping centre, you see an increase in foot traffic. So all those things that might cross-pollinate between departments, it's quite important, and you can start to set those things underway if you've got good data sets. Why is it so important? Because it's a very valuable entity, and anybody who runs big property, they need to be doing it in a profitable way, but they need to also maintain good records and see what's going on. Having access to your data and making sure that you've got no dependency on third party means you don't risk losing it. And yeah, people often talk about ESG, and I like to reverse it and say GSE, in that the governance should always be first. And yeah, in that, having true data ownership of all the data points. So yeah, you've just paid $400 million for a new office tower. Do you have everything that you need? And are you tied in? And are you also not spreading it too thinly? There's 7,000 new SaaS providers in the prop tech space, and yeah, the most I've seen is a client who had 320 different platforms they were pushing information that had information in, and you can imagine how many duplications and issues they had with all that information. Without data democracy, so yeah, data hoarding, there's a tendency from consultants to contractors to even just staff, to internal staff, to hold on to the information and treat it as their own personal information when really it belongs to the building itself. So yeah, being of doing that. Data ransom, so when you come to terminate a contract, particularly I've seen it with managing agents, so where a CBRE or a JLL look after a building, if you come to change the party looking after the building, all the data disappears, or you get charged a fortune to tie into it. Lots of people talk about APIs and application program interfaces. So it's the ability to pull data from one platform to another, but too often these don't actually work, or they'll limit you to a very specific template. So making sure you know what you're getting into. And yeah, without data democracy, the poor handovers. So like I said before, at PC, there's things just don't get handed over, or they intentionally don't get given across. Or sometimes it's just that interoperability of moving to the next system, it can't be done. Whereas if you're thinking from the outset about data democracy and making sure everybody can get to what they need to, you know where things are supposed to live. We've used this term about a globally unified information data layer, so that all these different departments can access what they need to. And yeah, the idea that whatever you're trying to look at within the system, you can just turn this Rubik's Cube and you're not pulling from somewhere else. It's all connected to each other until you find exactly what you're looking for. You might need to look at the leasing information, even though you're doing a chiller replacement. So if you're replacing the chiller, you need to know, is that tenant about to move out? Because it's a good time to do it. Whereas if it's a brand new tenant, disturbing them and making conditions not right might cause bigger issues. Hopefully that made sense to everybody about the data democracy. I'll hand back to Jen, and I think Alex is on next. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Liam. Awesome. We'll jump straight to Alex. We'll do questions at the end, but if you're watching and you've got a question, feel free to stick it in the chat and we'll come back to those.
Thanks, Jen.
Alex.
Thanks, Ian. I'm just going to hopefully share my screen. So please, Jen, give us a shout when that's come through.
Looks good.
It's on there. Excellent.
Well done.
Okay, well, just going to follow on from Liam, but first just introduce myself. Jen gave me a very flattering introduction already, so I won't go over that kind of stuff. But really, I'm coming from the point of view of a consultant in this process. As Jen said, my experience with data has been, I'm a big lover of data and a big fan of using data and a big fan of kind of being part of a larger team that utilizes this. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what consultants' needs are and how they potentially differ to people like facilities management and things like that Liam does. And obviously, this idea of data democracy is super important for a designer, because without information and without brief, you really can't start. So it's so important that we have that information. My little title slide here is the velodrome out at Chandler, and this was one of these kind of projects where using a lot of physical 3D data was an excellent kind of process. I'm not going to talk so much about that process. I'm going to talk a little bit more about, if I can get my slides to change. There we go. Different kind of types of data. So the two terms I'm using here aren't necessarily industry terms. They're just ways of me to organize my thoughts in this discussion. And I've really branded this active data collection as when you're putting a brief together for a building project, this is the kind of data that you should be looking to try and find to inform the design team. And what we find in our industry, I guess, is a lot of the time this data is really difficult to obtain. And I think Liam alluded to this earlier, that people like storing data or hoarding data. But really, this data is so important to us, and really we kind of need to extract that data out of, or we often have to extract it out of the experience of staff and clients, whereas really there should be a repository for this stuff, and all that information should be, as part of a business, available, such that when the business needs to engage consultants or do a building project, all that data is available and they can use that as a brief. One of the problems we find now is it is often generated, particularly when a project is conceived. And probably more likely than that, it's probably half generated, and the design team are asked to go through a process of actually trying to obtain it, which is great. We're used to doing that, but the reality is it's a very inefficient process for a client to pay somebody to actually go and find their own data. So I think that's something that we can improve on. The other one I've kind of picked up here, I'm calling passive data, and the reason I'm calling it passive data is more data that's kind of collected generally for other purposes other than the design brief. But the reason I kind of talk about it a little bit now is I find this data is actually really important to us as well, because this data, whilst it may not have a direct use in terms of informing a brief, it may have a very positive impact on the quality of the project. And I've just pulled up a couple of examples there, things like foot traffic in retail centres. So if we know what the traffic is passing a store, we can either improve the traffic or improve the sale of the store, or whatever we need to do to actually inform that project. And I think companies like IKEA do that really well, where the data they probably collect is probably internal to them, but they have a lot of great systems where they actually kind of watch people and how they interact with their facilities and their stands and their displays. And that all feeds back into making better displays and making better commercial decisions. So I think that data is, whilst it's kind of ticking away in the background, having that available at the right time is super important to us all. And kind of touching on the digital twin. So that, again, that's something I think probably we'll talk about later, but the idea of data that's kind of sucked in from the environment, it might be energy, it might be solar radiation on building facades, it might be traffic, all those things that if we start collecting it, it might not have a definite use right now, but if it's there and it's available, it will start to feed into a better process. So I think that all feeds into that kind of idea of data democracy quite well. Going on to more of the kind of practical side, I guess, which is probably my active data part of it. I feel a really good part of this is being able to define a brief. And as an architect, I can tell you one of the worst things you have to do in life is, other than door schedules, is there's a room data process where you have to kind of gather all the information on room data sheets. You may find that the client's got some, they may find that they're all different formats. They might be handwritten, they might be incomplete, they might be in Excel. And you've got to try and wade your way through all this. So often there's a massive process in trying to extract all that information. And what I think will be a nice way to do this, and I'm sure people are hopefully, is having that data available in a good format, so that data can be shared and it is equitable. And this data should not be stored like it is the it's the IP of the company, how they operate, etc. All important to them. But in sharing this data, they're actually making a much better product for the rest of us. And just going down that later idea of democracy of data, that data right at the start, hopefully we all do our jobs properly, we kind of spread through the entire project right to the end. And obviously the more practical kind of applications for that are things like existing equipment. That's pretty obvious really, but if you do have existing equipment or you're doing a refurb, having all that data available so people don't have to go through the whole process of project understanding and going through a whole building and trying to work out what's going on, what the latency of the equipment is, and all these things. Having that available at the start will inform a project much better. So these things I think are direct client benefits, and often you don't start a project saying we need this client benefit, let's get this information. It starts really at the end of a project, and understanding that you need to gather that data at the end of a project to be able to pump into the next project and keep that kind of circle going. Things like operational data, they're not so much for an architect, or maybe a little bit for an architect, but logistics of how how maybe logistically people deliver to this building, how it's worked in the past, what the problems are. Is there a timing thing going on that we need to resolve? If we see that data available to us and we're asked to try and solve a problem, this is how we do it. We interrogate that data and we look through those issues. So I've just shown a little picture here of a project that I was doing, a little office development. Just because I got a good brief at the start, I was able to produce a very quick room data sheet set, which linked back to a drawing. And on this, there's a few. There's quite a lot of fields in there that aren't shown, but it's very quick for me to actually cross-reference that and analyze what I've done as a design and fed back to the client. And that is a really, really efficient system. So I think we try and hit those targets if we can. The next little section I'm going to talk about is what I'm calling, this kind of whole process of generating design data. So as a designer, whether you're an architect or a service engineer or structural engineer, your little role in this whole kind of building lifestyle is to generate this initial data set, which is the construction data. And I'm using the term here, the project information model, which is an ISO 19650.1 term. It's pretty well known in the industry. But it's an idea of using a model which is generally three-dimensional these days. Hopefully it's never two-dimensional, but it has that information in that model, which is useful for the construction life of the project itself. So in trying to kind of identify this particular set of modeling, I'm trying to say that we don't necessarily need to think so much about the asset management at the end, even though I'll qualify that later, just before anyone starts asking questions. There is a real use for data in construction and design, which is probably has a bit of a dead end to it. And one of the things it really does for us is it enables us to control and audit a lot of our information really clearly, really well. And if we use it correctly, and we can use lots of filters in our authoring programs, and we can use lots of ways of analyzing it, we can make sure that what we're doing is actually well audited and it's correct, which is a real benefit for everybody. Also, there's the idea of using this common data environment, which there's a number of ways of doing that, and I won't be kind of software specific here, but having some environment where you can have a single source of truth of data. And in my experience, I find that some people take that a step too far and they try and plug data into a software system which isn't really designed for it, because they want that data to be hosted in that one model or that one data set. I don't think that's the right way, personally. I think as long as there is one source of truth for each part of data and you can link through it and can access it easily and efficiently in a decent format, I think you can have many kind of repositories, I guess, for that kind of stuff. But that's open for questions. I'm sure people have some ideas on that. And then really the idea of being able to simply share information quickly across consultancies and into construction is really important to having quality design and making quality buildings. The old-fashioned way of 2D drawings are great. The purpose of them was to communicate. It was to have a set out of built information and a specification, etc., etc. But actually wading through those things, even as someone that's like legible in that world, it's really difficult to actually try and cross-reference 6, 7 different documents. Whereas really through this kind of BIM process and using these project information models, we can embed all that stuff really simply and easily. And I'm saying nothing new here. I'm just trying to really point out that these are super important things to carry on. This little kind of picture is a little reminder of a project I did in China, which had around about 50,000 bespoke panels per hall, and these little coloured things you can see on the side up here. And really that, because it was such a complex process and we had to construct this thing, we did a lot of data management on how to actually provide really fabrication information to a contractor. And it was all done through a kind of BIM process, if you like, embedding information into a model. So they could click on any part of that panel or any panel they like, and it should just run that to a machine and build it. And it would also have a tag on it, which allowed it to be located geometrically on a facade with, with 50,000 panels on a facade. It's actually quite difficult to say where things go. And the orientations are all different because they weren't regular shapes. So without this kind of method of actually acquiring and feeding that data through a process, I just can't see how we can actually achieve that efficiently. So it's a very unique little example, but I think it's a strong example to show what we can do with data. Finally, in my little section, I'm going to talk a little bit about the next part of this, which is then delivering an asset or the asset information. And the vehicle we probably use more these days is what's termed an asset information model. These terms, they're not particularly new, but they're certainly not ancient. And if you go back, say, 10 years, I think one of the main issues we had in terms of delivering BIM and delivering information and data was there was not that definition between the stages of the project particularly well. So a lot of people are asking for asset information and asset management through the design process, which is extremely inefficient for designers, and obviously costs money. A lot of people weren't prepared to pay that money up front because they didn't see the value of that information to themselves as a consultant or a client, because it wasn't them that was receiving the benefit. But I think now being able to separate those two models and be able to really focus what we put in an asset model as opposed to a construction model is an important way of trying to understand how we can smooth this process across. So, one of the issues we do have is we often don't know what the asset management system is, and it's probably not a problem that Liam sees much because he looks at large building sets, but certainly for smaller clients, I see it quite a lot. You get a brief that says to comply with an asset management system, but we don't know what it is. So how can we kind of feed that in to the start of a process if we don't know what it is? And I think the way of doing that is to try and make sure we do define clearly what is a BIM process for construction and what is a handover or an asset model. Some people don't like the 3D, I guess, and I find, I don't know whether that's a real generational thing or whether that's something that the facilities managers are just not interested in, but over the last probably 10 years or so, I've seen lots come and go and none have really stuck. So that's an interesting talking point for everybody. And I think really the ideal goal is to make sure that we are providing correct and valuable information in the right source, and perhaps make it less software dependent, if you like. There's no point in trying to limit ourselves to a software environment if we know that those environments change almost every year. In fact, they do change every year. So it's trying to look into the future for the next 20, 30 years and just see how we can actually manage our data production right now in order to kind of feed that through into the process. And I think the idea of us as consultants is to try and make sure we are being efficient. We do care about the construction world. We do care about being efficient. We don't necessarily want to waste our own time for no benefit, but we do understand that if there's a really strong system, we can build within that system and try and push that data through to the rest of the team and hopefully hopefully that will get stronger over the years, because one of my biggest disappointments in the BIM world is how slowly it's been moving. I'm sure you've all had that experience yourself. So yeah, that was really what I wanted to kind of go through today. So I might pass it back to you, Jen, and I'm obviously open to, I've probably thrown a few things out there which might be baiting for questions, if you like, and hopefully we'll get a few good ones after that. So thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I started my career 15 years ago and everyone was talking about how we were going to start using BIM, and it was another sort of 10 years before I even saw a Revit model, I think.
Yeah,
I don't know.
This particular, I didn't really introduce this image, but this is a Griffith University image, which I know Liam's familiar with. And that was probably the most integrated BIM deliverable I've made. And that was done in 2010, so 12 years ago, which is a bit embarrassing. And Liam's got a few more stories he might tell, but it's really quite disappointing that we were so far down the track at that stage and really haven't got a lot further. And you might find there are little islands where people have done a lot further, but the industry as a whole is probably where I'm talking. It's kind of been a bit disappointing, I found. So.
Yeah. Okay, well, we can talk more about that when we get to our panel discussion. Let's jump to Parag now, and I think you've got a couple of slides to share as well, Parag.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. Thanks, Alex. Good presentation. Apologies, everyone. I'm just last minute pitching, so my slide pack is a recycled pack.
Thank you so much.
It is very relevant to this session, and I hope you find it interesting. Just before I share the slides as well, like say, I've been in this space for a long time from a property owner's perspective. I started in building data analytics, optimization, and fault detection, and sort of using that data to provide recommendations of building upgrades and transition on sustainability. At Mervac, we focused on the office, industrial, and shopping center portfolio in 2009, but the challenges back then were everything was on spreadsheets. There's no technology. It was ABGR, and Green Star was, I guess, 50 projects. And then at Property New South Wales, the technology obviously had improved, but our asset portfolio is spread across the state of New South Wales from Broken Hill to Albury, and we did not have on-site staff. So there's always different challenges you address. And with my current role at Australian Unity, we have 12 different asset classes, from social infrastructure to your conventional asset classes, and 6 different funds who operate quite independently in silos because their investors are different. So I'm just going to talk from that perspective, from a property owner and client perspective. What are the big challenges? Because we look at all the aspects from financial, investment, and operational aspects. So just the slide on the screen gives you a flavor of what sort of considerations we have. And there's 3 key categories. If you think of it, it's the people that run our business and work in our business, and our partners are also people. So what are the aspects that are important from a people perspective, from a technology perspective, and management perspective? So it's talking about management, say, innovate from the center. So for a complex property group which owns 150 properties, if people start doing things in silo, a person like me who is trying to drive things centrally, or others, it's just a mess. So it's important to have that step back rather than get into doing ad hoc stuff, and develop a framework and strategy first, but in consultation with the team members, and then have a 10-year or 5-year plan to deploy it in stages appropriately. And every stage you have to test and have a 360 loop that feedbacks into improvements. Have a clear strategic smart building or portfolio framework. Develop specific use cases. So think through the applications first and then jump into technology, because as Liam was mentioning, there's too many vendors out there. Companies like us get reached out every single day by 5 or 10 different companies, and people sometimes, when they have bottom-up approach, they go and just implement a technology without thinking through how does it integrate and apply to the broader business. And that creates those 300 products that Liam mentioned in some of his client portfolios, which half the people are not even aware of. Differentiate and recognize. So there's also a people factor to the management. So as Liam was talking about and Alex was talking about, there's a lot of technical aspects to this. So the company should not bunch them together. Like administrative task skills are different to technical. So companies should have appropriate skills that can deliver successful outcomes. Just by itself, the technology is not enough. The other aspects of the technology side of things are standard data mapping, tagging, storage, sharing. So all data, I always want more and more data. But if it's not stored properly, it's not structured properly, the tagging is not there, it can connect to the centralized system that something like Build Apps develops, it's worthless. So having that framework is a critical aspect. So things like building control systems have been in existence for decades and millennia, and they still don't work properly as they need to because the linkages are failing. We also are transitioning towards cloud-based wireless systems, which are more plug and play, like your home devices. The only aspect there to consider is the cybersecurity issues, and sort of those sort of data sharing issues have to be critical in a commercial enterprise. The application should be really easy to use, and the backend needs to be complex because there's a lot of complexity and that needs to be addressed. But if the front-end user has a lot of complexity, they have to jump through hoops, they're never going to successfully use that. And productivity is obviously, if it does, a plan is a really good plan, it's implemented well, you have a clear strategy and you work with the right partners, you can improve the overall productivity of the business and the outcomes you deliver. And also one of the key aspects is skills and training is critical, because you can't just deploy systems like a lot of change management teams do without even getting the right people involved, training them, getting feedback, and sort of doing that transition over 3 months. This slide just outlines like the technical sort of different aspects in a built environment that all need to be connected, and all these systems have their own data sets. But I will talk more about what are the aspects from a property company or governance perspective that we are interested in, like cybersecurity, resilience, future proofing. So you can't just keep replacing stuff, it needs to adapt to future technology upgrades. Sustainability is a big focus. So all our investors, our tenants, our stakeholders are always asking us about ESG, and people will not invest in us or rent properties from us if we are not doing stuff on that space. I've already spoken about standardized data tagging, plug and play, cloud-based is key. So even BMSs, our current specifications is mandating that the BMS need not be a physical computer on site. It has to be in the cloud. So anybody can access the BMS on a tablet or a computer or laptop from anywhere. It's just redundant mindset that people have these rooms, facility management room where there's a computer. And the first thing I said to people when they argued with me is, say the Windows update itself on those computers, nobody keeps it up to date and the computers crash. And we have had issues in my previous role. We had a statewide portfolio. Half the site used to be offline all the time when that was the case. So that's important. Privacy controls and data controls are very important. Say all this data needs to be live in today's time. So at live asset registers, ownership records, leasing records, all sorts of things cannot be set and forget, because otherwise that data is useless. This is just a map of like 3 key verticals in a property business, like what are the different property systems, so building management control systems, security systems, irrigation, etc. What are the different sustainability systems in a built environment, like smart metering, rooftop solar, LED lighting and wireless controls, but also like other things like utility information, budgeting, emission mapping, etc. And then you have the user experience systems, which are all your access control, biometrics. And if you had time, like I could literally show you linkages in each of these verticals that say this data can be relevant to sustainability because of these reasons. And we have when you have this holistic data, and based on slide that Liam showed with his Rubik's Cube, and you can run around the Rubik's Cube like a smart person can deliver substantial outcomes for the business. These are some of the challenges in a property business, like depending on the scale, geography, all sorts of things. But if you have a national, most companies have national asset locations, asset size are different, age of asset is different, and the marketability and appeal aspect of it is quite important from a downstream tenant perspective. If you want to sell the property, or we want to attract investors. Absence, in some cases, there's no on-site team present. So then having the systems in place and data-driven approach is quite critical. Tenants complaint verifications as well. So what I found in my experience previously that, yeah, obviously the tenants, a few tenants always complain it's too cold, few complain too hot. We had a property in Broken Hill. Just flying out somebody to address those concerns used to cost us $3,000 just for one single visit, excluding the costs that the consultants or companies used to charge. But when we implemented IoT smart building systems and captured a lot of that qualitative, quantitative, and user interface data, we could address that based on evidence-based approach with the tenants, which is good. The repair and maintenance optimization is also critical. So making good decisions on the redevelopment projects with BIM modeling and sort of costing and those sort of things, existing asset inventories, asset registers, end of life analysis, and also data dumps for, say, if a property had constant maintenance and repairs and the costs were bulking out, what are the systems that are causing that? If you had good data sets, you can run reports, you can find those things out. And if there's other sites which are really running well, you can compare the two and find the differences and gaps and come up with a strategy of delivering better outcomes. Obviously, this presentation is not specifically for this, but this is just a roadmap for 2030 net zero on one of our funds. And all these steps require that data because there's CapEx involved, there's OpEx projects involved, there's ongoing building, fine-tuning, optimization involved in this process. Having asset registers and inventory of all these emission sets, like from refrigerant inventories to diesel inventories, is critical. But also making business cases, all that data needs to come together to provide the fund managers and the investors good business cases that they can rely upon and make good decisions. Again, there's a lot of stuff in here, but this is sort of a map of all the different, the top 5 emission stream on an operational asset and what type of systems, processes, metering, etc. you could put in place to capture all that data in a structured fashion and in stages. So the gray ones are stage 1 implementation, blue is stage 2, and then you get into more and more complex data sets, which is the stage 3 implementation, and that starts building a holistic picture. And if we had all of that today, could generate a system report which gives an overview to the management and decision makers of how the entire ecosystem is working well or not working well. These are some of just quick examples. So one of my previous roles, we had issues like bushfires in the regions, and then we implemented a lot of IoT technology to alert people when there's smoke, and so they can go, like we just used to send automated emails or SMSs that they should leave the office and go to a safe place, etc. And even when you had flooding issues, like we used to do that. And in COVID, especially, the technology helped us a lot based on live occupancy tracking and clustering of people. So we used to manipulate the HVAC system, lighting, and control the zones where people can work. And that way we maintained our neighbors' ratings and green star outcomes, etc. So as a summary, like what sort of benefits that the open source or democratization of data add to the broader building and, say, digital ecosystem in Australia or elsewhere? So data democratization is a key. So we had a partnership with ERA and CSRO on the data clearinghouse project, and there was a lot of learning from that. So it has to be open source. Like holding data just literally doesn't do anything. And currently in my business, we are starting afresh. So that's the biggest single problem. Like the finance team has financial information, the property team has leasing information, and everybody just filling up spreadsheets. And to most extent, people are always worried about cybersecurity. But if you think of it, a lot of this data it's not personal data. The biggest risk is for personal data. So we openly share our invoice platforms and things like that with our tenants because there's nothing to hide. It just reduces the admin effort and too many people involved unnecessarily. Standardization is another key. It has to be standardized so that different systems can be integrated into each other to deliver required outcome. The quality, privacy, and audit reliability is important. Data discovery. So there's a lot of technologies now, Bluetooth or Wi-Fi, and you can discover, say, BMS points and things rather than having a technician map that all out if it's set up properly. The other thing is you can constantly innovate and research and reuse that data to find new use cases, applications, and improve your business. A centralized source of all truth is important. So we are talking about the building BIM data, which we are doing on new developments. And even ACONX documents, most of the time, it's sort of the stage gate ends when the building is handed over. That data, as Alex was talking about, never translates to the FM teams. And again, we start afresh. We have paper documents of OpEx manuals and things like that. So if that translated, there was a real-time model of the building, we could translate the asset register. We get all the asset registers from that integrated into the asset register. And every time anything changes in the building, it's sort of a live platform that captures data. It would be so good for most property owners and reduce unknowns and costs. And the benefits are, like, for an open source thing, you can think of the Apple ecosystem where they have created the phone and the platform. And then app developers have readily available information which they can develop apps on. So application developers can benefit, IoT vendors can benefit developing specific use case-based applications that are successful. Building owners obviously benefit because they actually hold all of these things together in their properties. So reducing upfront costs, making really good decisions, having very accurate information in the business case, and there's unlimited platform options, but yeah, we have to have the structure right. And it's obviously system integrators, it helps system integrators to streamline their processes, IoT service providers and building services contractors. So the entire industry would benefit if we had democratic data available and open source. We sort of shared the data openly as well to make the entire industry a successful platform. Thanks. And I guess you can happy for questions. Jen's the chair, so or we can talk about it at the panel discussion.
Thank you, Parag. So I was just struggling to find my unmute button then.
Yeah, I'm just struggling to find my own unshare button.
Okay, let's see
stop share.
if we can get, get everybody's back with their videos on. Lovely, see your faces. Okay, please feel free to put any questions that you have for the panel in the chat. I'm going to start off by just asking Parag, what are your greatest challenges when it comes to collecting and using data in your larger portfolios?
The biggest challenge is convincing. So the decision makers are always the money people in a property business. So making them understand what this all means and why is it important. And because most companies, before they start, they've been doing BAU, they still make the returns. So that's one of the biggest challenge, influencing and convincing people. But the other challenges are like if you have consolidating your service providers. So it's before the data, you need to have streamlined contracts. So if you have a single service provider, like say Jones Lang LaSalle, CBRE, etc., who does your operations, you have a centralized system for your building development property, like new property data. And then you can, if that all is set up, then you can integrate that together. And yeah, everybody benefits. And also like making people understand that you need to let go of that control is also a big challenge. Because in legacy companies, so Australian Unity is a 180-year-old company. Especially, it's a big challenge because people in my business have been around for 25 years. So it's very hard for them to change their mindset to this sort of approach. But I think it's small bits and pieces. So if you start with smaller projects and do some pilots and demonstrate the viability and benefits, then it starts changing people's mind.
Yeah, okay. So is that your strategy for success?
Yes, we have had some success in the last 9 months already.
Yeah, by demonstrating on smaller projects, is that a pretty good technique? Yeah. Okay.
Or you just like as you attend some meetings or go through the workflows, whenever there's a roadblock, then you question and then give them a sort of option. Like if you had this in place, you wouldn't have all these issues.
Yeah.
So you always try and pitch in wherever you see an opportunity to get them to pay attention.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Okay, let's jump to Liam. Question for Liam. Can you tell me, why is data democracy so important to you personally? And
it probably is where, I've gone from being a consultant and did many projects with Alex where I was the consultant on the ESD side and mechanical engineering in your office, Jen, previously, that being paid to find the client's data was the most painful thing I'd ever had to do. And going through the whole of UQ, Griffith, Landis, Dexys, and I'm like, they're paying me to find something that exists already inside the system. It's just not well structured. And then you're not actually adding value. You'd be the librarian who's finding the book instead of being the professor who's reading out of the books and giving some wisdom. So I think it's that bit of not wanting to search for data anymore, wanting to keep giving it and then actually give some good insight.
I think the same, Liam. I might just jump on that as well. I think my experience of, say, user group processes in design are just immensely frustrating. because so-and-so will be there and say one thing, someone else will say another thing, there'll be an argument going on in front of you, and it's about a job or a process which they do, and you've been asked to design for. And it's like, well, why am I sitting here listening to this argument when you all know what your job is and you know what you need to do? I don't know it. I'm trying to find it out. If that data was there and available, to just be able to give to a design team, you could just move a lot more smoothly. It really kind of makes more sense. And I don't think that data necessarily needs to be protected. It could be really open and democratic, because it doesn't really matter if somebody else sees it. It's about your process and what you want to achieve in your building. So I'm with you completely on that one.
And historically, on the other hand, like the property companies, whenever we're doing a 55 asset review for 10-year capex plan, the biggest fear are asset managers and fund managers. I will get a big list and Excel spreadsheet of data request. so from every angle, like there's issues about data.
Yeah,
people are scared of.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's like you kind of said, Parag, it's people realizing they have to invest in setting up their data structure before they come to need it. Not just, oh yeah, Alex needs it for a new project, give me the list of all your complaints. For if you're building a new extra building, it'd be great if you had all the complaints about the old building. Oh no, we don't have that in the system. So you just get told about the last complaint, and all the focus goes on, I'll make sure there's good daylight because someone's complained. Whereas there might be 100 complaints about there being too much daylight, but just one person recently had it. Whereas if you set up your data structure from the outset to allow it to be shared for, there's always a use for the data that you might not see. And it might be a new project there. It might be perhaps, 2030 plan. 10 years ago, it was the, carbon tax reporting, the EEOs. I went through so much work trying to chase information for that. Yeah.
When you talk about data being publicly available, Alex, are you meaning for design teams or just like literally for anyone who's curious?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think I probably ought to qualify that. When I say publicly available, I think probably available to the people that need to use it or the people you're asking to use it, rather than searching on, say, the internet. But having said that, people like Twitter and Facebook have those things available. If you want a little kind of bit of software to go and search through a lot of stuff, it's all on there. So we are all used to it. But you're right, it's probably worth that qualification. It should be provided with no limits to those that require it for that purpose, I believe. Yeah.
It's more about the format than anything else, by the sounds of it. Like, is all data good data as long as it's formatted properly? Do you think?
I think you've probably answered it slightly yourself there. I think I'm a big fan of, I'm a scientist at heart, I guess, but I'm a big fan of data for the sake of research. But as you point out in your question there, it's about how easy it is to access it, and I think it's good data if you can access it well for the purpose that you need it for. And so much of the issues I found and it leads to that kind of whole resistance to BIM, I think, is that often the data which comes out of things people see as either overbearing or useless or not really important to them, or you can't access it properly and can't use it. And because it's so enormous, you just get turned off very quickly. So I think you're right. The answer to that question really is about how well formatted your data is and how easy to access that is. And I think if you can achieve those things, you're a long way to moving on.
And who's kind of leading in that space? Like, what is it? What sort of service is it that provides? So that's you, Liam. Liam's like, I'm leading.
Yeah, so he's got the apps.
But it's actually got to be client led. And that's why, what we do, and our entire business model is completely unorthodox, because most SaaS tries to get the data to hold on to it. So whereas we're just providing apps, but the data lives in the client's own system. So we actually want the client, we want Australian Unity, the stuff ones, the apps, the charter walls. They should be the people who centrally hold the data set and give it out to different people as and when they need it. It should be a star system in that they're at the heart of it. They own the building, therefore they should own all the data around it. Whereas I'd say in the last 10 years, there's become this trend of lots of satellites around the building, having bits of information about different parts of what's going on. And so when the people come to do a design for a refurb or an equivalent building, they can't find that. or the people who are operationally being told to do a 2030 strategy, they've got to check 300 different systems and they can't. Whereas if it's all being pulled back in to the person who owns the building, that's where it's got to be. You've got to treat it as a commodity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with Liam. Like the challenge in the industry is, and historically it's never been seen that the property owners or the listed groups are the ones that need to establish that data mapping framework, strategy, and data structure. And then also they need to come up with the use cases that are meaningful to them. Most times what has happened is people just go and say they just keep looking for these SaaS providers who can solve all the world's problems, or a lot of data in property sits with, if a company has an external service provider like Jones Lang LaSalle or CBRE, I'm taking their names, I'm not saying they're bad or good, but just for reference sake, that all the data, say all the leasing and property management related data, all the FM data, all sits with them, even WHS and things. And the biggest issue that happens is a churn of the contract. So most of the time I've seen companies stop on service providers after 5 or 7 years. Even though all those people do the same, say CBRE people know Cushman people know JLL, they never actually transition the data out properly. They just walk off, give trickle feed information, and the contract is unsuccessful for the first 2 years because the start foundational data is not good. So that's where my personal view is that the property owner should own all the data. And looking at that, they always think it's a risk, like there's a cybersecurity issue if you have this data, but at least they know what the level of cybersecurity and controls they have in their own business. They are not even aware if JLL can be hacked or not. So I think that's where the things need to go. And I guess obviously Liam's working with a lot of groups. So the companies are starting to only now understand that. I've seen a lot of sort of recruitment on the technology manager or digitization manager side as well in companies, just on this theme. So I think it will take another 5-10 years for people to realize, and there'll be like big impact on the market in that sort of transition.
And it is that risk, Jen, if everyone does it differently, then they can never talk to each other anyway. So you've got one extreme where you have 300 different platforms, and then you've got another one where you custom build. A big portfolio in Australia spent $170 million on building a custom platform that can't talk to anybody else's platforms because it's so customized and unique to them. That you've got these two absolute polar opposites where one's trying to play and the other one's trying to lock it down, and trying to find that balance between the two. And there's still times you do need to send information out because someone's got a magic formula. And everyone's got their own IP, and that's where Alex said about sharing everything. I don't think you're ever going to have the true share of everything because you've got to have a competitive edge. Australian Unity are competing for funds from different people. The Charter Halls are competing for different funds from the projects happen because money gets put into them. And even down to the builder gets chosen because they can do something slightly different. The consultants, you get a job at Arup because they deem something you can do is different to someone else. So everyone keeps the secret sauce, but if we all know that we're all using tomatoes and onions, we've at least got a base that we all can do, and then you can put your own recipe on top of it and give it back. But
I like that analogy.
making me hungry, Liam. But I think if I was going to put a consultant's aspect on that one, I think the work I do a lot of computational work, and there's a lot of what I might call IP that is relevant to me, but no one has to see that because what it's doing is it's producing data or it's churning data and spitting it out the other end. And the way I do that is my own way, and I hope it's efficient. It certainly works for me. But the output is no more special than anybody else's output. So the IP is not the output. The IP is my process to get to the output. And that's a designer's point of view. It might be different for an FM manager or whatever. But I think the IP is what you do with it or how you analyze it, not necessarily the actual hard data. There are some cases where the hard data is, if you go in gold mining, you want to know where the gold is, that's good data for a gold miner. But so I think often it isn't that, but there's so much more benefit on actually if you submitting or building a project or a system to actually, and you're employing people to do that, is to actually get that data shared with them so they can actually do their things, what they're good at for you.
I think the most important transactions we do is buy and sell properties as well. So when we get the DD packs, if we had this level of information that we are talking about today, we could make better decisions. The seller might get a better price because there's much more transparency in the transaction. We have literally almost 99% accurate asset registers and end of life analysis and cap rates that we can apply, etc. And then when we sell the assets, it's the same. I know valuers, like, they themselves struggle. So doing annual valuations is a big sort of property thing, because there's market disclosures and you have net tangible assets and things. But yeah, most of the valuation reports I read, like, I would like, if I just had to give feedback, I say literally you only had 20% of the data that you need. It's a lot of finger counting and thumb in the air sort of stuff. Just based on experience. I'm not saying it's rubbish, but it's purely because people don't have access to quality information.
Yeah, and I spoke at the API, which is the property valuers big event, about the day in which a valuation of a building includes the quality and quantity of the data they have on the building will be a very good day.
Yeah,
because then all the work that Alex does up front will actually go into will have a physical value of staying with the building. And when you're buying a building, you turn up and you go, well, yeah, where's your BIM model? Where's your asset information model? Where's your whatever it is? And if you don't have those things, you lose a couple of million off the face value of your building, and suddenly it does have a tangible value that carries through.
That's
the other thing is, like,
yeah.
Financial data is the other critical data that is the worst data set in any business. So in operational matters, like if you have spent 12 months HVAC, lighting upgrades, this and that, all that exact financial numbers we spend, the repairs and maintenance, etc., for that to a specific equipment should be captured. So it helps us in future years. Even in a BIM model, if we have that, like what was the investment in, say, laying the pipe work or the duct work, etc., it helps. Like, we wouldn't need to hire, like, every year people go out and hire consultants to do capex planning. And because it's all paper-based PDFs or Excel spreadsheet, when people leave, again, it's lost. Again, somebody does the same activity. If at least for 5 years, let's say, if we had a very good BIM model that translated financial information and quantity information, we could project with standard CPI and stuff very accurately what's it going to cost us if something fails or replacement, etc. But yeah, that doesn't really exist. It's a big challenge.
Yeah, right. Lots of challenges. I'm just going to go back to some of the slides. I had a question about passive data, Alex, and how have you got any examples of how you've used passive data?
Yeah, I think I could probably pull up one. So, and it kind of feeds into that, really, the whole conversation we've been having here about sharing that data. And the one particular example I can think of was when I did the North Queensland Stadium with Cox Architecture at the time, and the data that was really valuable wasn't really from the client as such, which is interesting because it kind of feeds into that idea that Liam's been talking about, ownership of data. And Parag also. But the data we used was from the F&B consultant who had run a lot of those kind of facilities and stadiums for quite a long time. He designed them, not run them personally, but designed them. But what he had built in is the way of receiving till receipts and receiving sales data across all these things for years of time. So he could really pull on that data straight away and tell you that people in towns will prefer to eat this kind of stuff, or they prefer to buy that kind of beer, or they tend to not to come to the stadium earlier or later. And that was actually real, true, valuable data. And what that did was allowed us as a design team to kind of feed that into the new food and beverage offerings. So we don't necessarily copy straight out, because there are other factors of environmental, different locations, et cetera, but it's a real valuable tool for us to actually inform a really quality brief and be really positive that when we built this building for how many millions it was, it's going to work. And that for me was an excellent example of trying to take data from, perhaps which wasn't necessarily there for us to use or wasn't given to us specifically for the project, but had been sucked up over a number of years, and that was actually a really useful piece of information in the end. So it's interesting because that was held by the consultant, and he'd been very smart in the way he'd set his business up. Managed to suck all that up, which now I think about it, we have been talking about it should be, data hoarding. So it should have been held by the client. And the client should have in that conversation about that. So.
But it is that bit of keeping both having a copy of it is fine, because if he's involved in it, he should be able to use it for his purpose, but the client should, whereas too often it stays, I know, I used to have the clients ringing me to ask for a drawing for their shopping centre, and I was like, I'm your consultant, why was that? Oh, here it is, I'll give it to you.
Not unusual. Liam, you referred to PropTech silver bullets. Have you got any examples of PropTech silver bullets? Sound pretty cool.
I won't name any particular businesses, but there's a hell of a lot out there, and I'm sure Parag's been gone to the armory every other day. It's everybody's claiming they can solve every single problem without any effort. So put this magic box on, put this on, we've got AI, we've got ML that does this, and you don't do anything. Like, we all know that's not the reality. There is no two buildings are identical, no two users of the buildings are identical. Otherwise, Alex wouldn't be in a job and you wouldn't be in a job, Jen, because we'd just be going, we'll have another one of those, another one of those, another one of those. So when people are coming in going, with this, and I've seen, we've had one of the biggest portfolios in Australia on analytics on the BMS. They were spending $1.8 million a year on analytics on top of their BMS. And when we actually started to look at what the analytics was telling them, over 95% of the tickets that were raised by the system could never have happened, because the vast majority of their buildings the equipment was so old that it was smart stuff it was telling them, but it didn't see the fundamental of, it was a 20-year-old chiller and it was an AHU without VSD. So it can come up with these great algorithms on the cutting edge, but the fundamentals of going, so it's actually creating a whole heap of work, people going, oh, you should be trying this. And then they go and ask the BMS tech and go, yeah, we can't, because you need to update the BMS first. So it's that idea of do the basics first, then don't try and curl a ball from the halfway line before you kick it in from 2 yards out. Build up to the really complex stuff. But we see too many people chasing the complex stuff and doing a trial and then throwing it away, doing a trial and throwing it away, and having KPIs in there to do as many trials as they can without actually having a long-term goal of going, we're trialing this for this purpose to get to this next stage, to get to this next stage.
Yeah, you've got to get the basics right, I guess, get the building blocks in place at the beginning.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of things become like the bad subscriptions of Netflix and stuff. Like, people are excited for the first 6 months, nobody watches anything, but because it's automatically deducted from your credit card, it just keeps chugging along, and you, at the end of the day, when somebody like Liam audits your system, you know, shit, we are spending $2 million. When did we last log into this system?
Exactly.
Ouch.
That. And it's that bit, everyone claiming to make the saving. So another client, there was 30 people claiming.
So most of the building analytics and fault detection, it's obviously, I'm not saying they're bad, they're really good things. If the right people are involved at the client side, if the FM team is motivated, there's role descriptions and responsibilities. But the pitch is that, install all this metering, do the analytics, you'll save 20% on your energy bills. It's not like LED lighting, set and forget. Like, you have to do a lot of work ongoing and pay attention to get those savings. But also on these SaaS platforms, like we are looking at ESG reporting platforms, people come and pitch the C-suite, oh, it's fully automated, robotic analytics, this and that. I said, like, how are you going to get the data? Where are you going to get all these data streams from in the first step? and how the linkages are going to work. Yes. But like, obviously, even though it works eventually, like that's 1 or 2 years worth of a lot of hard effort. It's not like we just sign up with this platform tomorrow, automatically some magic wand, all these metering data sets are going to just start going to this platform or bills or whatever. It doesn't happen that way. But yeah, there's a lot of mismarketing, I guess.
And what you say about the 20%, right? The amount of times I've seen where someone's got an ESG initiatives list, and it's actually going to get them to 20 stars on Neighbours because, because they're going to get a half-star benefit every time.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, yeah, you've achieved the world's first. And they're all even like I've actually told clients not to put LED lighting in, because the lights never turn on because the daylight's so good in the building that it's never on, or not. People never visit it. They're only there for such a short time period. The benefits aren't there, so it's not always as clear as it is, and people love to exaggerate. They used to do one case study and use that as that, and everyone goes, oh, it's going to save me 20%. And COVID showed it more than anything. Like every single implementation or trial that happened during COVID would have saved energy.
Yes.
Because there was no one in the buildings.
Yeah.
So
like you could have just like taken a data dump from the Neighbours website for ratings in 2021 and say 2020, most of it.
Yeah.
And you could see like every site had improved 2-3 star.
Yeah. And things like that are people understanding. So Alex, seeing what all the buildings use in terms of their energy before you set what the energy target for a new building would be, and the client having that and giving it to you and going, whereas too often it's what's the industry benchmark, which are quite often poor data sets, and you can't interrogate them.
So what kind of data sets do you think are really key throughout the entire life cycle of the building?
The number one for me is the asset register, an accurate asset register. So many people need it, from the maintenance team to the CapEx team to the OpEx, and that everything should be spun outwards from that. And even interacting with other sets, but thinking outside of your domain as well. So even though if you're building services, the leases are just important to you. So not thinking just about what you do, thinking about the whole life cycle.
So just like the analogy would be, if you're doing home insurance, you need to have the inventory of everything that's in your home. If you have flood, fire, and you want to claim, even as a basic thing, even in office buildings or wherever, you don't know what exists in your building very accurately, you can't get the claim. But asset registers as well, people use it loosely, and everybody you ask, like I'm pretty sure, Liam, all of your clients, when you first meet them and ask, do you have good asset registers? They say, yeah, we have an asset register. It's some really crappy spreadsheet. All it says, first of all, it doesn't capture all the assets. All it will say is there's list in the cells like chiller 1, chiller 2, chiller 3. No sizing, no kilowatt-hours, no specification, model number. Does it have what sort of chiller it is, centrifugal or not?
It's the conflicts and things that happen off the back of it. We had a client who their asset register said they had 6 cooling towers. You go to Google Earth and look from the top, and there's only 3 cooling towers there. You go into they had an analytics platform running over the top of it, and that only had 2 cooling towers because only 2 of them got connected to the analytics platform. So neither the SkySpark connection or the physical asset register were right. Google Earth can't lie. I can see 3 cooling towers, and we got the event to go and make sure there wasn't another 3. They're not hiding somewhere else, and that's things you can find. Other examples of the maintenance contract being written as a charge per VAV within the building. So and they were being charged for the last 10 years that there was 140 VAVs in the building. The BMS only ever saw 12. There was 24 installed, but that's it's a lot of money that's been charged for 10 years, and it was just used off the shelf. And it actually turned out that it was the points list for the VAV. So where each VAV might have had 6 points was being classified as a VAV in this, and no one has ever, so regularly checking it, but also if everyone's using the same source, when you give it out to different people, they notice that something's wrong in it. That makes sense. So
the issue is the same people looking at the stuff for many years, they never pick these issues. But the other thing is people just like work like robots. So any smart facility manager who sort of manages a 10-story building should logically know, like, can this building even have that many VAVs?
But they're overwhelmed. The level of expectation on a FM is beyond the level of expectation of some engineers. Like they spend half their time dealing with the woman who's locked out of passes the working.
Very trivial complaints, and somebody's not happy how their locker looks and all sorts of things.
So
that's why, like I said, that's the problem with building owners, broadly speaking. They don't differentiate between the technical skills and administrative skills, and there's other skills. There's tenant engagement skills, quite unique. Some people are really good at it. And a lot of times in some property, if you have a single tenant, sometimes it might be easy because you have a clear contact on the tenancy side. If you have 200 tenants in your building, it just the FM is just running up and down the building all day long. Can never focus on these things.
And understanding life cycles. So like CIBSE Guide M is kind of fundamental to everything that I've ever done in this space. So trying to get people to understand that when Alex designs his building for a 60-year lifespan, that's not actually true. Do you know what I mean? The BMS might last.
That would be a good life cycle if Alex can guarantee 60 years.
But
really good.
You're hired, Alex.
Every single asset within the building has its different life cycle, and that's like a textbook life cycle versus what it's been doing versus what it is. And understanding, there's so many big operators who they set aside a budget of 1%, which is an industry benchmark for this type of building, for what they're going to spend on looking after the building, even though it's 20 years old and none of the equipment has been upgraded. So they haven't actually got a true picture of what goes on. And the most complicated thing in buildings are the building services. So don't tell that to a structural engineer. They have the biggest risk to work out at the start, but the building services has got so much variety. And
so that's the passive system. Once it's done well, the structural just stays.
Exactly.
But the issue is like that. The problem is that the decision makers and who run property businesses are finance people. They have no interest, like in say of efficiency. They only flag stuff when their balance sheet shows, oh, there's a lot of OPEX expenditure going out of this property. So all they're running are some scenario analysis. They just do benchmarking on their assets, and that's how they flag. But they're not interested really in understanding the building services or how it can be improved.
But also you have people who are a BMS technician or from a BMS world thinking that the data that BMS produces is the most important thing. Which isn't, like, just because the BMS is screaming you need to replace the chiller. If there's no budget being set, but you can't magic up $500,000 to replace a chiller. It has to go through a process cycle and budget cycle. So there's, it's thinking of the people at the top, but also thinking of where the data gets produced.
And it's also because a lot of BMSs are just set up generically without understanding the type of equipment in the building. So if you have a centrifugal chiller versus a power pack magnetic bearing chiller, and if you have the same side chillers versus different side chillers, all strategies should be different. But you would have come across that everything is like stage 1, this chiller goes up, it runs up to 90%, then stage 2 comes on. And that's the worst, like that possibly reduces the life cycle by half in some cases of some of those technologies.
Guys, we are running out of time, and I'm conscious I've got one question that I really would like to ask all of you before we run out of time altogether. So we're here for CIBSE, obviously. So most of our members are building services engineers, consultants and contractors. So I'm really keen to just hear what the three of you, what your advice would be to those people in this space. Liam, go first.
Okay. Think beyond your role. So where I had in what's called, think think of everyone who might benefit from any data that you produce and make sure you get it to.
Yeah, usable
it's
point.
similar, I guess, like have a broader thinking and vision about everything you do. And obviously, I think my personal view is the property owners need to take more ownership and sort of partner and collaborate with everybody that's involved in the whole of life cycle in property, which doesn't happen most of the time. Because I can always say to my internal colleagues that say, can't expect the consultants only have a small view of what you do in the business, and they're only hiring them for a specific scope. If you don't engage them broadly, don't give them the information, it's not going to be a successful outcome. But at the same time, especially when you're designing, where the consultants have and building services engineers have the most impact is at development stage or new builds. So at that stage, at least, like, it shouldn't be data silos. So if the chiller data needs to be shared and clearly understood by, say, asset managers, FNs. So even though there's a lot of technical information that the contractor might need, also think of how that data can translate to different roles and can be helpful to them, and also integrate into different systems over the life cycle of the building. So if it's set up like that, and I think the job there is to bring these discussions up with your clients rather than it's not my expectations that as a stock standard, every consultant takes ownership of every single thing and delivers that. But these are the issues that I think consultants, say most property companies do not have specialists in-house, especially look at the mid-tier and the small companies. They're just running assets to the death, just trying to make money out of it. So I think that's the job of the consultant who's a subject matter expert to bring these discussion points to those meetings at concept stage, design stage. And even in the life cycle, if there's a set scope for a project, we are always talking now to our consultants that if you think something can add value midway through the project, just let us know.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, like once we finish all the project, it's commissioned, it's too late. And then we are stuck with that asset for 50 years. So that's having an open dialogue, having that collaboration, think beyond yourself in terms of people and sort of future data integration and future proofing, but also speak up to your customers and bring value.
Yeah. Okay, awesome. Thank you. And Alex?
I'll just add to that one at the last minute. So I think for me, from a consultant's point of view, and I see this too often, is if you see a situation, don't just look at what you've been asked to do and say, that's what I'm going to do. Ask yourself, what can you achieve by putting that little bit of extra time in, being able to share your information with other people, doing a little bit of work that you don't necessarily have to do, but you do know that that information will then feed and help somebody else. And I think the reason I'd suggest everyone uses that approach is, one, if we all do that, it'll be a better process. But secondly, you almost certainly find that it actually helps you out in the long run because you've explained your thought processes to a person in a much better way. And that might have two consequences. One, that they might ultimately understand exactly what you want to do, or they might find an inherent problem in what you want to do. And both of those feedback loops are really important here. So try not to sit in your box, just try and help out the process because you just don't know what you're going to get back. Usually it's good. So.
Awesome. Great advice. Thank you. Thank you all so much for giving up your time to do this for CIBSE members. It's been really interesting. I've really learned a lot. This is recorded, so we'll be able to share with other people who won't be able to make it as well, which is awesome. So yeah, thank you. Have a lovely evening, and I hope to be able to speak with you in the future.
Thanks a lot. See you all.
Thanks a lot. See ya.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.